Hey, it's Laria. This video offers some tips and some of my thoughts about finding a group to do high Mythic Plus keys with. It's a question that I get asked a lot, and as someone who has had a group that achieved the 0.1% Mythic Plus title last season, and as someone who has had to pug higher keys, I hope my tips and my thoughts are helpful for you. In Season 3 of Dragonflight, I achieved the 0.1% Mythic Plus title for the first time. It was a journey that I didn't even know was going to end up in the title range of the season. I'm someone who before Season 3, I only did weekly keys for my vault. I was kind of lucky with the group that I got title with last season, which leads me to my first tip. Play with friends or people who you already know. At the time, someone from my guild reached out to me and asked if I wanted to do high keys with them. He had said that it was always, a goal of his every season to, not necessarily go for title, but to just see what he could do in this season, right? Like see the highest key that he could get done. I said yes because I felt like it would be a good learning experience. If he was learning and I was learning, then maybe it would be a good match. To complete our group, I reached out to a tank friend and a DPS friend who I'd done keys with in Shadowlands. We just kind of did vault keys occasionally here and there. And I also reached out to a good friend who I'd been playing with since BFA. I've been playing this game for a long time, and I've also played a very social game. So I feel very fortunate that I have guildmates and friends and former raiders who I've met along the way to do keys with. But I understand that this might not be the case for everyone. So my advice is to just, if you have friends who play and who are interested in Mythic Plus, just start there, right? Reach out to them and see if it's something that they are interested in doing. With that said, I would make sure that they have maybe similar or comparable goals as yours. If your goal is to get the Mythic Plus title, make sure that that is also something that they're interested in. Because if they're just, looking to get, a certain score and kind of stop at that point, then maybe that might not be the best fit. But start there. Start with people who you know. My next tip is to add people on Battle Tag. What I mean by that is when you pug and the key goes well, add those people to battle tag. I always ask if it's okay to do. I just kind of consider it etiquette maybe. I usually whisper that person and I say, hey, mind if I add you? Or hey, can I add you? Something along those lines. You don't have to add everyone, but if you come across a really great tank or DPS or healer, whoever it is, then add them. Networking is really important. This is actually how I found our third DPS. Last season, we had a DPS spot in our group. We had people who, had just joined different raid groups. And so our third DPS spot / fifth spot overall on our team was kind of vacant for a while. And so we were having to pug people for a few weeks. So eventually we invited a random demon hunter and the key went really well. We timed the key. We might have done a couple keys after that as well. So I added this demon hunter to battle tag, and then over, the next couple weeks or so, if that demon hunter was on, I would send, an invite to them. And eventually that person became a good friend and we do keys every week now. So pugging is important. Adding people to battle tag is important. My next tip is related to the one about adding people to battle tag. Whether you are pugging or with a group, you want to make sure that you understand the dungeon or your role in that dungeon as well as you can. Yes, Mythic Plus is team content, and if an interrupt is missed or the tank doesn't have a defensive for a hit or the DPS don't use a defensive, especially on a high key on Tyrannical, yes, all of that can still happen, but you want to make sure that you are doing the best that you possibly can. So when I'm not streaming or playing WoW, I am watching someone else's stream or I'm watching a VOD on YouTube, and usually they're healers, whether it's a Resto Druid or a Mistweaver, like other healers in general, but it could also be that I'm watching DPS POVs, sometimes tanks as well. I actually learned something about a Resto Druid on a stream that was from a tank POV, someone was playing a tank, and I noticed that their Resto Druid did something last season, and then I started doing it on that fight as well. So I think just watching any kind of POV in the key levels that you are looking to do is really beneficial. On these streams and in these VODs, I want to see what the group's routes are. What defensives did they use? Do they have a mage? When did they use mass barrier? When did they use Zephyr if they have an evoker? If it's a fight like the last boss in Brackenhide, what cooldowns or trinkets did they use on the totems? All of these are small details that aren't necessarily talked about in a lot of general Mythic Plus dungeon guides, but I feel like these are the details that are going to really make a giant trash pull in a dungeon go smoothly. These are the details that are going to help make a dungeon run overall feel really good. Additionally, ask questions when you are watching a stream or leave a comment on a video if you're watching a VOD on YouTube. I asked a lot of questions last season. I still do, actually. I ask a lot of questions, but I asked a lot of questions in season 3 when I was learning everything. I met a couple of Rester Druids who had, reached out to me and who I had also reached out to them at some point, and they were incredibly helpful last season. They offered tips. They offered talent build suggestions. If I was taking one talent, they would say, oh, well, you can drop this one and take this one instead. This one's a little bit more beneficial in this dungeon because, XYZ, right? And they would give me some suggestions that way from their experience. When I came across a very specific situation that my group was struggling with, I reached out to some of these people. In fact, I just did that last week. At the time of this video, I did that last week. My group was doing 18 Ruby Life pulls, and we were having a hard time on the first boss. It seemed like we were losing one person, not necessarily the same person, just one person in the group when we were getting to the intermission, and we had, figured out cooldowns that we were using, and it seemed like we were still taking a lot of damage. And so I reached out to someone and I compared the cooldowns that we were using, that we had kind of scheduled to use on that fight, and compared it to what my friend's group was doing, and they were timing 18s and 19s at that point. So when we made these minor tweaks, our runs were smooth after that, right? Our attempts. So I think it's really helpful to, if you're watching a stream or a VOD on YouTube, ask questions that come up for you. If let's say you play a Warlock and you're watching a Warlock POV and that Warlock does something and you don't normally do that, feel free to ask why. Hey, I see that you're running this. Is this more beneficial? Is this helpful? Why is that? Because usually there's a reason why, right? Like there's a logic behind all of these decisions, or there should be, right? And I think it's just helpful to understand the why. At least it is for me, for certain talents or for certain routes or whatever it might be on a fight or a dungeon, because it's not just like you're taking a talent build that someone tells you to use. You're understanding why it's important. And I think that contributes to how well a dungeon is going to go overall. During season 3, a friend of mine told me that going for title would be incredibly time consuming. But at the time I wasn't worried because I had plenty of time and I don't normally get burned out from this game. However, toward the end of the season, I finally understood what this friend had meant. It's partially time consuming because if you're pugging, you're spending a lot of time in LFG, or you're spending a lot of time in groups with people who you don't know. And that also means that you don't know other people's experience levels, right? Like you're going off of an IO score, right? You can see their score, but you don't know how many times that person wiped to a certain boss in a dungeon, or how much time they spent in these keys that they depleted. You just see that, okay, maybe they've timed 117, but how many times were they in that dungeon? How much experience did they have in that 17? Did they have a comp that made things a little bit trickier? Did they learn how to do things a little bit more creatively to live through some of these boss fights or these trash pulls? You don't know. And so because of that, pugging can be very time consuming, because if you are just depleting key after key after key, you need to find a group that is, they're going to time the dungeon. Everybody knows what their role is and what they're supposed to do. Interrupts can't get missed and things like that, right? It has to go pretty smoothly. Alternatively, even if you're running with a group that you still might be depleting key after key, or you might be doing a dungeon to re-roll all of your keys into a dungeon that you actually need for score. All of this is to say that you should be as prepared as possible going into these dungeons, whether you are pugging or with a group that you already know. Just make sure that you are as confident as possible in these dungeons. I hope these tips and insight help you either this season or going into the War Within. And let me know if you have any questions about Mythic Plus. Also, if you are looking for more WoW content, you can follow me over on Twitch at twitch.tv/Laria.